Hey everybody, thanks for hanging out with me for just a couple of minutes. Here, our focus is being better and healthier than yesterday. Are you better? Are you healthier than you were yesterday? Here, we don't compare ourselves to him or to her, we compare ourselves to who we were yesterday. Self improvement has no end, health has no finish line. They are lifelong journeys where we take it one day at a time, and here we do it together. So let's do this. Before I get into the main content, if you want to get in contact with me, email and Instagram are the best ways to get in contact. Email me at benpagedc@gmail.com and on Instagram, benpagedc. And if you're listening to this, go to Instagram, tag me on the episode, and I'll tag you right back, and we get to know each other. I love to get to know the community, and I would love to get to know you. So let's get on to the main content. Hello, welcome to another episode of You Heal You podcast. I am your host, Ben Page, and this podcast is an interview or a conversation more than anything with Dr. Bill Schindler about how we can better nourish our children, our toddlers, our adolescents, our loved ones. I love chatting with Bill. This was a awesome conversation. I got all sorts out of it. I am 100% sure you will also get a lot out of this very important topic. Enjoy this episode with Bill Schindler.
Today I have one of my favorite people back on, Bill Schindler. He's been on a couple times. We've talked about the importance of how we should be eating. His book, Eat Like a Human, highly recommend it. I've read it more than once. I'm just so glad to have him on again. Today we're going to be talking about what's been on my mind a lot lately. How should we be feeding our kids, our toddlers, our kids, our adolescents, and what's the best way to do it? But before we get into that part of the conversation, again, Bill, just give a short introduction because you've already given it a couple times. But who's Bill? How'd you get to where you are today?
All right, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me on, and it's such an important topic. I'm excited to dive in deep because there's probably nothing more important that we can do than to make sure we're nourishing our kids at such an important time in their life. So my name is Dr. Bill Schindler, and I am a prehistoric archaeologist by training, which sounds crazy. Why are you even having this conversation with an archaeologist? But the short of it is, I taught and conducted research for almost 20 years, archaeology, anthropology, and realized that the entire time I was working on answering questions, lifelong questions I've always had on how to nourish myself and my family, that I could answer through the work I was doing by looking at our ancestral dietary past. And when we made the switch as a family to start eating in line with what I had learned through the archaeological record, anthropological record, lots of things fell into place. Lots of things changed. First off, I drastically improved my health to the point that it's now better than it's been in my entire life. I'm 51 now. Drastically improved my entire family's life, and it was such a drastic impact that we just wanted to share it with the larger community. So that's why I wrote the book Eat Like a Human. And now my wife and I, actually our whole family, own and operate a restaurant called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, and we have a nonprofit called the Eastern Shore Food Lab. Continue to conduct research and teach a ton of classes through that.
Nice. I know it's a beautiful story, and most people's changes usually start with food. And food is so important. And I think there's a big difference between food and feed. And most people in today's society, it seems like they're just feeding and they're not eating food. So, but let's start. What's your thoughts on when we should actually start to give infants more solid foods? I mean, I
So
want to know, start off with that question. When do you think, and through experience, what have you seen to be the best time? Of course, I know it's not going to be perfect, but what do you usually recommend?
Well, let me say two things. First off, I love the food feed distinction that you made. One thing that my wife and I think this is a very important way to start this conversation, because as we go through it, it's going to become very obvious that a lot of the things we have in our pantries and our cupboards and our refrigerators and on menus at restaurants is doing no good to us whatsoever. But we still unfortunately categorize it under this umbrella of food. And then when we have a conversation like this and people are listening and I suggest that it actually should get thrown away, it has no business going into our bodies. Everybody like, whoa, that's food. That's food. We got to, feed, hungry people around the world and all this, which is very important. But the reality is the distinction my wife and I have made, which is very similar to the food feed, is that food is something that should nourish us. And then there's everything else. And if we have that sort of dichotomy, that difference, food nourishes us and this other stuff actually isn't food, then getting rid of it or doing something else with it is not, it doesn't have the same sort of, same sort of mental energy or what have you. So as we're going through this conversation, especially we deal with our kids, one thing we need to consider is food nourishes us. And then there's everything else that we put into our bodies. And sometimes, and I think we'll get into this throughout this conversation, sometimes you can make the case that some of these other things, which aren't 100% nourishing from a biological perspective, still may have a place in our lives of kids in a modern day, but still doesn't necessarily mean that it's food. It's something completely different. The second thing, and I would just, I am, my PhD is in archaeology and anthropology. I am not a medical doctor. I do have very strong feelings about how we should nourish ourselves. And I just wanted to throw that out there in the beginning because when you ask me a question and I answer it, my mind to answer that question doesn't go back to medical school because I never went. My mind goes directly to the archaeological record, the anthropological record. How did we as humans do these things over hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years? And then and how is it different today, and what does that mean? So the reactions, the answers that I'm gonna give to this are from that perspective, and not obviously from a medical perspective, for whatever that's worth. But when should we start introducing food? And I think the other part of that is how should we start introducing food is important as well. I do believe that the only food that humans are perfectly designed to consume is milk from our mothers. Period. That's it. I mean, we do incredible things to the world around us through technological advancements. Some of these are millions of years old. Some of these are hundreds of thousands of years old. Some of these are 5 years old. But we do things to ingredients, raw ingredients in the world around us, to make them as safe and nourishing as they can possibly be before we put them in our bodies. That's what we as humans do. The one thing that we are perfectly designed to consume when we are infants is milk from our mothers. So the number one, we're mammals, obviously, and we are designed that way. Our digestive tracts are designed that way. The enzymes that our bodies are producing at that age as infants are designed to safely and efficiently derive incredible nutrition from our mother's milk. So number one, if we have the opportunity to nurse our children, that is the top, obviously best and most incredible way to nourish our children, not only from a biological perspective, but obviously from an emotional perspective, from a cultural perspective, from that skin to skin contact perspective. There's so many things that happen in that interaction from a mother feeding her child that are even beyond just that nourishment, or at least immediate nourishment. Lots of things are happening, and that's very well understood. If for some reason, and I do obviously understand, and here are two guys talking about breastfeeding. We have no idea what we're talking about, right? I do understand that there are sometimes complications in a lot of different ways. If that is the case, I would suggest my go-to for anything related to this is the Weston Price Foundation. They have incredible information about if you can't breastfeed, if you're looking to create baby formula, what should that actually be? What should it consist of? What is the most nourishing way to do it? Again, I would reference the Weston Price Foundation. Tons of information online. They have some incredible books that Sally Fallon, Morell, and others have put out. So that's number one. Number two, when we do start introducing food, remember we are living right now in 300,000-year-old bodies in a very modern cultural landscape, and there's a lot of inconsistencies there. So if we're trying to understand how for millennia, more than millennia, parents introduced solid food to their children, the way that they did it is they didn't buy jars of Gerber or beechnut baby food, completely dead, overprocessed, straight carbohydrate, oxalate rich foods. They took the same food that they were eating, solid foods, they chewed it up ahead of time, and then just like another animal does today, right? They chewed it, pre-masticated it, and then took that pre-chewed, pre-masticated food and gave it to their children. And several things are happening during that exchange. Number one, there's not a loss of nutrition from the jarring and the canning and the rest of that. The child is not only getting that food in a softer state so they can deal with it, but they're also getting all the beneficial, incredible enzymes that their parents have in their bodies that allow them to digest these foods that are new to the baby. They're imparting not just the pre-chewed food, but also the enzymes. They're introducing those enzymes, and in some cases, the bacteria needed to digest that food properly, introducing that into their children's digestive tracts. And just like with breastfeeding, there's a lot of other things getting exchanged at that same time. And some of it's information, some of it's just that feeling of touch and that really visceral and connective nature of a parent and a child, helping to feed one another. And the children are acclimating to what solid food in that particular culture or tradition consists of. And it's that segue. Now, I will say what's very strange to me is, so first off, remember, I came to a lot of the way that we approach things now after our kids were past being infants. So I say this not only from someone who's not, I talk about breastfeeding, I'm not a woman. I'm also talking about parenting young children from somebody who didn't parent that way because we learned things a little bit too late, as my wife and I both. But one thing that's very strange to me is, when we start introducing children to solid food, we take a baby and put them in a high chair, and they're so hungry that they're screaming. And then we put food in front of them, and they take that food in many cases and throw it. They throw it away, and they're screaming and they're tantrums. And we're giving them food. We're giving them something that can fill their bellies, and they smell it, they taste it, they spit it out, they throw it across the room. And we get very upset, and then we give them the food again, and then we make little, play things with spoons, pretend they're trains and automobiles and, whatever, and airplanes, and try to get them to eat this food. But the reality is what we're doing during that exchange is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. So first off, it is very strange to me that we have a screaming animal, right, or children, a screaming animal that's so hungry they're upset, and we give them food, and even in the state of being that hungry, they spit it out and throw it across the room. And something's wrong. Like, there's something about that food that's wrong. So, and they know it, right? There's something they're sensing. We have noses, we have taste buds, we have ears, we have all these different senses, in part to help us understand what we should be putting into our mouth to derive nutrition from, and what we should keep away from our bodies. It's one of the reasons we have all these senses. Today, we don't do that. We don't listen to them anymore. We listen to nutritionists and doctors and podcasts and all these other things that tell us how we should be eating. But essentially, that baby or that infant at that time is set up ready to use these senses to help them interact with the outside world and help make these decisions. And here we go, giving them this food. They're throwing it across the room. And by forcing them to eat that food at that particular moment, we are teaching them to not listen to their senses. We're teaching them to listen to somebody else, to understand what and how and when they should be eating, and how much they should be eating, and how little they should be eating. Now, I've talked to a lot of my friends now who are younger than me and came to this at a time in their lives earlier than I did, and are feeding their kids incredibly nourishing food as infants. They're weaning their kids on things like liver, for example, and these kids are eating it up. And I'm jealous. I'm jealous that they are in a place in their homes where they are not only providing some of the most incredible nourishing food to their babies or to their infants when they're weaning them, but allowing their kids to actually trust in their own senses. So if we look at timing wise, was one part of your question. It depends on a lot of different things. And one of the things I think everybody has to give themselves some grace about, especially with parenting, is even though first of all, I don't know every food that we should or shouldn't be eating as a human biologically. And if I did, that's not 100% the entire story. Because if I said, okay, these are all the foods you should eat, these are all the foods you should never eat, this is how you should eat them, and all this for our 300,000-year-old bodies, the reality is everybody's accessing this information through a podcast in 2024. Completely different set of social norms, completely different set of things that are vying for our time, completely different sets of all sorts of things about our cultural landscape that are different than they were 300,000 years ago. So some of the things that'll impact whether or not or how long you can breastfeed is what kind of job do you have, and what kind of situation do you have with your family, and all sorts of different things can impact it. And I think one of the things that my wife and I have tried very hard to come to terms with is the more that we learn, um, on one hand, the better we are as parents to be able to convey that information and make it a part of our lives. But at the same time, the more we learn where we're failing, right? Where we haven't been able to get there 100% because of whatever that is. And I think everyone listening to this really needs to realize, do the best that you absolutely can, and then give yourself the grace to realize that you've done the absolute best that you can. And there's a lot of give and take. And we'll talk about some other stories there. But anyhow, there are all sorts of, if you look in the anthropological record, there are all sorts of examples of breastfeeding all the way to 1 year, all the way to 3 years, or some people that would suggest there's examples that are longer than that. But if you look at hunter-gatherers in general, it seems to be about that 2 to 3 year breastfeeding range is very, very common. And part of that is because breast milk is just so incredibly nourishing, but also it's a way that hunter-gatherers have been able to space out their birth rate to have it in line with what they needed to do to keep that population at a particular size, given the carrying capacity of land and a whole bunch of other things. So, but within that, 2 to 3 years, I would even say 1 to 3 years for other examples, between 1 and 3 years, that there is weaning happening during that process. Right? There's been the introduction of solid foods in addition to the breast milk.
And that sounds but even because now in today's society, they're like, oh, it's 6 months. So 6 months you can start to give solid foods and stuff like that. What do you think about that whole, about like 6 month range? I know we're talking about modern society and modern medicine and what they're recommending, and we're not even going to get into that because a lot of that stuff I kind of push to the side too. But what do you think about that whole 6 month range?
Again, this is not my area of specialty,
Mhm.
especially at all. But my first reaction is 6 months is a heck of a lot better than 5 months, and a heck of a lot better than 3 months. So if you can do 6 months and you've done a really good job at 6 months, you should be so incredibly proud that you're able to give that gift to your child. So, uh, and I know, again, a lot of people in this space, 6 months is a decent amount of time. I think most people are trying to reach a year or a little bit longer, but 6 months is amazing compared to, I was born in 1973. In the 70s, I mean, the suggestion was modern science is going to save everything. Baby formula has it all figured out. If you're a good mother, don't breastfeed. I mean, and then we're still sort of kind of, coming back to the idea that was obviously terrible advice. Again, I don't know the ideal time, but I will say that is something that is covered very, very well in through Weston Price and others.
Yeah. And when I say start solids, I say continue to breastfeed as long as you possibly can, but introducing the solids around the 6 month mark, or would you say even later than that?
No, that's when we started to introduce as well.
Okay,
Introduce.
perfect. And that's what I wanted. So yeah, if you have the possibility, yeah, breastfeed. I mean, I agree with you 100%. That is where the majority of the nutrition the baby's going to receive is there. And then at slowly introduce the solids. I never even really thought about it that way because I never studied that way, but I love it. I mean, Why? I mean, so give the baby exactly what we're eating, but just in a way that they can actually digest it. So we chew it first and then give it to them. That might sound for a lot of people kind of gross, but I mean, it makes sense if you really think about it. I mean, oh, well, what am I going to give them to eat? What I'm eating? How can they eat it? Well, let me chew it first, and then I'll give it to them. And it makes complete sense how that should be and would be the way that we would introduce solids to our babies. But again, in today's society, I imagine the majority of people are like, that's kind of gross.
But think about all the things. First of all, again, if you look at, we do need to remember that we are animals. I mean, we are animals. We are domestic. We are the first domesticated animal on the planet, but we are still at heart animals. And if we look at other animals and the way that they start feeding their young, it's exactly what they do. But if we could get out of our own heads and just think about exactly what's happening, all the things that are happening when we do it. Number one, that child saw us put it into their mouth. I mean, the baby with the beech nut, they're sitting there, they see us eating a slice of pizza, and they get this, dead food of thing of whatever, sweet pureed sweet potatoes out of a jar, and they're eating that, and they see. So a baby seeing us interact with them in the way that I'm suggesting, the first thing they see is they saw us, their parents, put that food into our own mouths. They saw us chewing it. Then when we give it to them, we have skin to skin contact. We're imparting enzymes. We're imparting bacteria. All of those things are happening at the same time. And at all of it, all the aromas, all the flavors, all the textures, all of that is a part of that experience. And that, I mean, you can't put a price tag on that sort of exchange. It's a completely different system than the way that we do it in the modern Western world now.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, and that's what we need to go back to. What makes it's common sense. I mean, who cares about what we think it might feel like in the outside world? It just makes common sense. Now that I'm truly thinking about it, it's beautiful. Now let's get into the foods. So,
Okay.
what do you believe would be the best way? So, when we're starting to wean them off the mother's milk, of course, including mother's milk with the solids, what are the first solids that you recommend that we start to give to our infants? And then as they grow older, how do we continue to give them more and more food?
I My approach to this would be, and again, I'm coming at this telling you telling you what I would do, but we didn't when our kids were young, just because we didn't know. But in general, when I think about food for adult humans, toddler humans, infant humans, I always go back to the safest, most nutrient dense, bioavailable foods on the planet are the things that we should base our diets, excuse me, off of. So when we think about that from animal perspectives, animal based parts of our diets, meat is more nutrient dense than and safer than vegetables are, but the organ meats are even more bioavailable and nutrient dense than the meat is. So one of the things that is a staple in most of the people in this space that are having children right now, and I'm watching what they're doing with their children, is one of the early foods they're weaning off of milk onto are things like liver, and even if it's chicken liver, beef liver is even better. But those foods, you do not, first of all, from a safety perspectives, you know, you don't have to worry about things like plant toxins and oxalates and glycoalkaloids and all the other lectins and phytates and things that plants naturally have that we have to get around. You don't have to worry about any of these things. And you don't even have to cook it for our bodies to break it down without a whole lot of work. And just if you're thinking about two things, if you're thinking about a baby's need, right? What we've done as humans, we have we've maximized the size of the human head that can come out of an adult female's pelvis, really, right? Birth canal. And the way that we have, through evolutionary pressure for millions of years, created our species, a species that has these brains that are 3 times larger than they were in our ancestors, and allowed women to survive birth, is we've extended the amount of time that our brains develop and some of our body develops to outside of the birth canal. It's called neoteny. We give birth to incredibly defenseless babies. If you think about other animals in the world, a horse has a baby horse and the horse stands up in 40 minutes or else something's wrong. I mean, the baby horse is standing up and walking around in 40 minutes. We give birth to these completely defenseless babies that we have to take care of for years. But what's happening in the first several months, especially of life outside of our mothers, is a massive amount of growth that would normally have happened inside of the womb, right? But we've extended it and allowed for it. So the nutritional needs for babies, not only in the amount of calories, but the quality and diversity of nutrients in that food is incredible. So it isn't like just trying to fill their stomachs. It's literally trying to fill their stomachs with the most incredible amount of nutrition that require the least amount of digestive work possible in order to get that nutrition to go where it needs to go in our bodies. So again, mother's milk is amazing. Beyond that, things like incredible organ meats are fantastic as well. But I just want to pause for a second to say one other thing that I thought of. The highest nutritional requirements for a human female are actually when she's lactating. They're high when they're young, they're high when they're pregnant, but when they're lactating, their nutritional needs skyrocket. So in addition to thinking about how we feed our babies, is how we feed our mothers that are feeding our babies, which is incredibly important as well. So we need to make sure that it isn't the kind of thing, and again, I'm a male saying this, so this is very difficult to say. And I'm in awe of what mothers are able to do, both from carrying the baby all the way through to nursing them and beyond, obviously. But it is very important to think about when you're pregnant, how you're eating, because you are growing another human inside of your body. That's absolutely true. But it doesn't stop when that baby is born. In fact, your nutritional requirements are even higher to do it right after they're born in order to feed them properly and yourself, and make sure you're healthy throughout the next 6 months, a year, to whatever it is as you're feeding your baby. So the same kind of things that I'm saying a baby should be eating, as we're weaning them, I think should be a major part of a mother's diet as well. So number one, animal-based resources that are incredibly nourishing, nutrient-dense, and bioavailable, I think should be are very, very, very important. And as far as plants are concerned, there's a few things that I would say about the plants. I would be very cautious. Take some time and look at where plant toxins are very, very high in some of these plants. And if you think about it, and I would steer away from them. This isn't to suggest that babies shouldn't be eating plants. It's not what I'm suggesting at all. But there are some plants that probably shouldn't be in a baby's diet. And if they are, they probably shouldn't be there in great quantities. So spinach would be a great example. I mean, every single baby food manufacturer has some sort of cream spinach nonsense that's out there, pasteurized in a jar. We feed it with a spoon. But, introducing such a high oxalate food that's incredibly difficult to digest, that at the same time has these sort of pseudo nutrients in them, that we as a parent will look at and say, oh, spinach has iron in it, and that allows us to sit back and rest and say, oh, we've got whatever nutritional requirements that our children need into them, without realizing that the iron that's actually in spinach is something that their digestive tract is never going to absorb, and it's going to pass right through them. All of that plays a role into all of this. So I would stay away from the high oxalate foods for sure. If we're giving them any sort of vegetables whatsoever, I would make sure that it's in the lower end of the toxin load. A lot of people disagree with me on this, but the two parts of plants that are typically the lowest toxin are flowers and fruits, because the role of the plant, that part of the plant, is to attract. So I'm sorry, ripe fruits, not an unripe fruit, ripe fruits. So ripe fruits would probably be, a great thing to introduce as well.
Sorry about that. And how do we use so because I completely agree with you. I think the highest density food is definitely animal, and I believe that we should be consuming the majority of what we eat as animal. So with how do you consider salt with meats? Can you provide? Because a lot of people's like, I can't give salt to my baby. What do you think about salts? And of course, I'm not talking about processed salt because that's garbage, but any type of good salt like Redmond salt from Salt Lake or Himalayan salt, or I mean, people are even starting to talk about Celtic salt and all these crazy salts that have tons and tons of micro minerals and stuff like that. And what do you believe? Can we involve that in with the meats that we're providing
Oh,
our
100%. And I also believe that and as you know, the narrative around salt has changed drastically, even in the past 6 months compared to what it's been over the past 30 years, 30, 40 years, really. So yeah, 100%. And then there's a couple things to think about with salt. One thing everybody needs to realize is all salt that we're eating is sodium chloride. And all salt is actually sea salt. It is all sea salt. It's one of these marketing schemes right now. It all start, but what sea it came from or when it came from is very important. So, for example, there's wonderful so Celtic sea salt, all these other sea salts. Some we actually at the restaurant use a Sicilian sea salt from Trapani. It's a wonderful salt flat in the northwest of Sicily. This is great. They have these big football field like flat areas, and they let seawater in, a very thin layer of it, let it evaporate, and then they collect all the salt. That's awesome. It's coming from today's seas. The cool thing about places like Redmond's, for example, and we're actually turning over to go exclusively Redmond's here at the restaurant. They're wonderful. Is that's from a sea as well, but it's an ancient sea, right? So not only are you getting all the minerals and other things that are coming from the seawater, but you're also getting all the microplastics and the pollution and everything else that's in that seawater if it's from a modern sea. But from an ancient sea, like Redmond's, that was a sea, but now they're mining it underground because it's an ancient sea. So you have none of the other pollutants that are typical of a sea today, impacting it. So I really like that. And look, the two things to remember. It's giving your kid birthday cake on their first birthday is no big deal, right? Giving your kid some ice cream is no big deal, right? Those are individual events that actually have a lot of it could be argued cultural and emotional nourishment to them, right? It's the things you do every day that end up, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, that make a huge difference, both in a positive and in a negative way. So doing something isn't a big deal. Doing something over and over and over again becomes a big deal, either in a very positive or very, very, very negative way. So I say that both to, don't beat yourself up if you're not doing all these things immediately. Working towards them is awesome. And also don't beat yourself up if you end up, breaking protocol, every now and then. But when breaking protocol becomes the protocol is when we see huge major issues. And it's not that none of this is really rocket science. And I hope everybody's listening to this and getting some good takeaways and listening to a whole bunch of other people for a bunch of information. But we have been doing this successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. We've only gotten ourselves in trouble through, in modern times with it. And it's because we're listening to other people, and other people are trying to sell us something, and on the backs of our health, on the backs of our kids' health. One of the best things that you can do as a parent as you're working towards this is, first of all, again, give yourself some grace, give yourself some peace, knowing that you're working towards, some sort of a solution or some sort of a lifestyle that's just incredibly nourishing for everybody in your family, including yourself. But at the same time, understanding the food that's in your house is of the utmost priority, because once you start to understand what that food really is, how it's made, where it comes from, you can lessen how much you have to listen to other people and start believing in yourself a little bit more. You're informing yourself. You're creating in your house this connected culture to your food, where you can start making a lot of your own decisions and feel confident in them.
Oh, yeah, and that's how I always tell my patients too, is the small little things we do over time that causes either us to break down or to heal. And what
Yeah.
decision are we going to make? Are we going to make the healthy decision that's little, but over time compounds, or are we going to do the opposite and become sick and diseased over time as we make these small, unhealthy decisions over time? And I do believe that, yeah, every once in a while, I mean, yeah, you're going to enjoy because it's every once in a while you take into the fact that it's the quality of life too. So if I'm going to go to a party, I need a little bit of ice cream because I'm going to be with people. I'm going to enjoy the quality of this moment. And then, of course, my day-to-day activities, I'm trying to eat as healthy as possible. So I love how that you came up with that because maybe people think, well, I have to do this all the time. No, it's how we live our day-to-days. And then, yeah, we have these events where we take in, well, is this going to help my quality of life? Of course it will. It's one time now. And then tomorrow, let's get back on to what I know I should be doing regularly. But
Yeah.
I really, well, so I can eat meat, saltless. Organs are a little bit different. I need salt on my organs, and I usually eat them with onion. That's how I usually, and I really enjoy it. But the more I eat liver, the more sweet it becomes, and it's becoming like the sweet meat for me. For some reason, it's just becoming more and more sweet as I eat it more and more and more. But how would you provide that? Because if you eat liver, that becomes how do you get that and then give that to your baby? I mean, just real quick. And yeah, go ahead and answer that. But I'm gonna have to make up a new meeting. We're about to close. So if this closes, let me send you a new link. All right.
It's cool. So couple quick. First off, we don't monitor salt in our house, and this is talking off the cuff, but if we just had a baby and brought a new baby into our house, and when we started to introduce solid food, I probably, and maybe I'm wrong, I probably wouldn't monitor it either. I would just again be giving the same kind of food and salt that would be in my own. I think salt's a very, very important thing that we should embrace. The other thing we don't monitor in a way that we're limiting is high quality fat, right? So high quality fat, I do believe, is one of the most nourishing things in the world. And I mean, smalts, tallow, really good butter, especially really good cultured butter, fermented butter from a grass-fed source. Those are things that we do not limit and sit there and plug into spreadsheets and figure out how much we should or shouldn't have in a day and what's naturally coming in. The other, so as far as the liver is concerned, if you have a really good source of beef liver, I typically eat my beef liver raw, and I probably would chew that raw and hand that. Again, I'm speaking from somebody who's 20 years removed from being a brand new father, 19 years, but even a but even a little bit of cooking with it is not that detrimental to any of the nutrients. So chicken liver, I think, is such a very, very easy step towards the organ meats from a flavor perspective and from a texture perspective, which is, I think, what we're a lot of people who have grown up without organ meats in their diets. The texture is one of the biggest. There's not much that has a texture like an organ, right?
So we're talking about the foods that we need to give our kids, and you slightly said a little bit about fats, and I personally believe also fat is like the superfood. It's what we should be consuming. It's so important in our overall. So what are the fats that you recommend that we give our kids, and is it just liberally?
It is liberally. Um, if it's the right fats. So one of the issues that we have with all of these conversations is we have these categories of food. We say things like bread, we say things like fat, we say things like whatever. And unfortunately, within each one of these categories, there's so much diversity. Some of it's incredibly nourishing, some of it's incredibly damaging. But we lump it all together and say, oh, fat's bad for us. And it's really, really unfortunate. And the other issue with the way that we say fat in our language is fat is the same word for whether it comes from a cow, whether it comes from a soybean, or whether it is the stuff that sits around our bellies when when we're couch potatoes. And so in our brains, when we hear the word fat, it's incredibly confusing. And we immediately associate, oh my gosh, if I ate that beautiful, amazing, flavorful white stuff hanging off the side of the ribeye, then I'm going to get fat, right? We have these really unfortunate, and we lump together animal fats with nut and seed oils. So a couple of very quick things. Number one, these are the fats that I would never restrict in my house for me or anybody in my family, no matter what their age are. Butter, tallow, lard, schmaltz, which is poultry fat, and that's about it as far as never even thinking of, whether we eat it, whether it's been in something cooked or whatever. Like that is, and it's an amazing source of nutrition. It's an amazing way to ensure that we're satiated, right? We have that proper sense of fullness after a meal that stops us from overeating. It's and it shouldn't be a surprise. It's an incredible source of flavor because we are designed to listen to like I said earlier, listen to our senses to understand what we should be eating. So fat simultaneously gives us that incredible flavor, knows that we're getting something that is good for us, and it also gives us that sense of being satiated, which signals to us, yeah, I've gotten all this incredible nutrition. I'm done. I'm going to go off and do whatever I'm going to do now for the rest of my day and not sit here and eat a whole bowl of potato chips. So the other fats that we include in our house and also include here at the restaurant, but don't heat, usually heat, I mean like cook with them, is olive oil, avocado oil, and coconut oil. Now, there's a big push now against industrial nut and seed oils, which I'm in complete agreement with. Avocado oil and olive oil are fruit oils. They come from the fruit of the plant, which means several things. One of the things is it doesn't require, especially in the extra virgin part of these, it doesn't require massive heat, massive pressure, or a whole lot of chemicals or any chemicals whatsoever to get the fat out. So those are fats that we use in cold applications, things like dressings, for example. Like if I was to make a dressing to put on something or that we use that. We do use some coconut oil, and even though coconut oil is from a nut, technically, there's a couple of things about it that are incredible. One is it has a lot of saturated fat in it, which is awesome. It also, just like the olive oil and the avocado, it doesn't require massive heat and pressure or chemicals to get the fat out of it. I mean, if you look at a coconut, the fat just about comes out of it. I mean, it's very easy to access it. It has incredible flavor for different things. So for some people, including coconut oil, can help with some of the cravings they might have. Otherwise, all the rest of it is completely taboo in our house, in our diets, in our restaurant, all of it. So any of the soybean oils, corn oils, canola oil, sesame oil, any of those, we keep all of those oils completely out of our diet for a lot of very, very important reasons. And just another great source of fat. I'm sorry, I left this off the good list. Is marrow as well. So bone marrow. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because bone marrow, we have documentation in the archaeological record of bone marrow entering our diets at 3.4 million years ago. 3.4 million years ago, our ancestors were intentionally crushing long bones of large animals to extract the marrow out of that and include it in our diet. So we've had those kind of fats in our diets for almost 3.5 million years. And the industrial nut and seed oils, have been in our diets for a little bit over 100 years. And in addition to so many other unfortunate aspects of modern life, you can track the introduction of nut and seed oils into our diets, and then how things like obesity, coronary heart disease, and a whole bunch of other issues have skyrocketed. There is no place for any of those oils in our diets whatsoever, and even more importantly, in our babies' diets. So one thing we can do is make sure that they're not in our house at all. And actually, when we started this conversation, and I said, get the category in your mind of food, stuff that nourishes us, and everything else. This is the thing I was thinking about in the everything else. This is the thing where if you want to make an immediate change in your house for you and your family, go into your cupboard, grab all your industrial nut and seed oils, and throw them out. Like literally throw them out. They don't have any place. Don't even donate them. Nobody should have them. They cause disease. They cause harm. They're terrible. Get rid of them. But don't think you're throwing away food. It isn't food. If you want to put them somewhere that they belong and you don't want to throw them out, then put them in the garage, because most of them were invented to lubricate machines. So put them in the garage and use them the way they were intended, not as food. So get rid of those. But also, this is one of the reasons I love learning how to cook things entirely from scratch. When you see where industrial nut and seed oils have made it into recipes, you would be floored that you can almost not go to a restaurant and keep them out of your diet. Like it's almost impossible to do. So know that they're there. So here's a great example. There is one of the cool things about Buffalo Wild Wings, if you've ever gone to that chain, is that they actually fry all of their wings in tallow. And they're touted as that. So there's people in sort of the paleo space and ancestral food space, and the people that are very pro animal fat, anti nut and seed oils, that say we're going to go to Buffalo Wild Wings and eat their wings. Now, obviously, where their chickens are coming from is a little bit suspect, but at least they're frying it in tallow, and that's great. The problem is, I don't think they make a sauce there that isn't loaded with industrial nut and seed oils. So understanding that, say, okay, great, I'm going to go there and either eat wings that are completely unseasoned, not dip them in anything, or bring something of your own. But almost every salad dressing in the world that you would get commercially, unless it says different, is made with some nasty, nasty oils. One other quick side note is, once you start diving on this rabbit hole, it's very easy to get lost, but it's an important rabbit hole to dive into. There is a huge difference between extra virgin olive oil and any other olive oils. So extra virgin olive oil is that first pressing, and then after that, it goes through a series. What has been pressed goes through a series of processing to extract every little tiny bit of fat out of it. So then they'll chop it up, really, really fine, and then press it, and then and put it in a centrifuge, and they start adding all sorts of chemicals to it in different pressings to get every little bit out of it. And it gets more dangerous, more dangerous, and more dangerous as you go through that process. It is very, very rare to find extra virgin olive oil in a commercial salad dressing anywhere in this country. If it does, they'll say it because they're boasting about it, and they should be. But if it just says olive oil, then put that in the same category as the industrial nut and seed oils, because it's just as bad and just as nasty. So those fats, I'm really not. One of the things that I've learned as a father and as a husband is to be 100% completely dogmatic and not be able to bend, especially when it involves food. And food literally all of our emotions are involved with food, and tradition and everything about who we are as humans is so wrapped up in food that to be so incredibly dogmatic and say always this and never this is a very difficult place to be as a human, and continue to nourish ourselves in all the other ways that we can be nourished beyond just the food. But this is one that I put my foot down on, that, we are doing our best to make sure that there are no nut and seed oils in our house or our family at all. And it's only the high quality nourishing. And when it is the high quality nourishing stuff, like I mentioned, marrow, lard, tallow, schmaltz, butter, ghee, that we don't monitor at all. If we want it, we put it in. If we have a hankering for it, we put it in. We cook in it. If there's fat on the side of the steak, we eat it. It's supposed to be there. It's part of the entire thing. One other, and I know we keep going off on tangents, but I get excited to talk about these things. Fat, as if you are looking at the grocery store for meat, or you're butchering something in your own home, one of the things that I wish, we're finally crawling out of this after decades of this sort of low fat mantra getting pounded into us, flavor comes from fat. One of the reasons a ribeye is so incredibly flavorful is because there's a whole bunch of fat inside of it. A pork loin, especially if it comes from the back of the loin that has absolutely no fat in it whatsoever, is horrible. Like, you have to do a whole lot of stuff to that pork loin to make it taste good. I mean, it's fine. It does deliver some nutrition, but what I'm suggesting is, don't be afraid of the fat. In fact, actually embrace that fat, because in addition to all the nutrition that comes with it and the satiation that comes with it, is flavor that you can't get otherwise.
Oh yeah, and it brings me back to just me eating myself. I mean, it's crazy how fast I fill up when I eat fat. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, sometimes I'll take those ribs and I'll eat two or three. I'm like, whoa, I'm done. I mean, I'm full. And because it's so full of fat, and it is my favorite part of the animal is that rib, because there's just so much fat around it and it's so good on the barbecue. And I eat those and I'm full so fast. And it's so important because people will just continue to eat, and your body's telling them to eat and eat. If you want to have your body let you know when you're full, eat fat. And I've seen that in my own life. And I love also about the whole flavor. Oh my goodness. There's nothing more flavorful than fat. Yeah, it's so good. And we should be eating it more. And people are so scared of it, like you were saying, because they see fat as this bad thing, or what makes me look fat and stuff like that. But it's the opposite. We should be eating it. And I believe that we should be eating it just like you said too. There's some fats that we should be avoiding at all costs. And I believe when you say put your foot down on that, we should all be doing the exact same thing. Don't let seed oils into your life. Don't let nut oils into your life. Yeah, it's a terrible process of how I watched the video of how they process those things. It doesn't make any sense how someone would actually consume that after seeing how it is actually processed.
Absolutely. Can I
Thanks.
say something about milk real quick? I just
Yeah.
because I think
Oh,
this is with the fat. Um, One of the other, and this relates back to this weaning process. One of the things that I think might be confusing, in addition to introducing solid food into our kids, is when we make that switch from human breast milk to milk of other animals, right? So, or milk from other sources, right? Uh, Let me just say a few words about milk in general. Number one, humans are mammals, and we are perfectly designed to consume raw milk from our mothers when we're infants. When we start the weaning process, our body starts to suppress and in some cases eliminate the production of certain enzymes that we use to fully digest that milk. One of the things that happens with milk in our bodies when we're infants is, first of all, that milk is coming in completely raw, teeming with live bacteria in the process of fermenting. And then it gets hit by a bunch of enzymes inside of our digestive tract that are designed to safely and efficiently derive nutrition from that milk. When we and all other mammals begin to get weaned, we lose the ability to do that as efficiently. In a few human populations prehistorically, there was a genetic chain mutations that allowed some humans to continue to be able to digest lactose far into adulthood, something called lactase persistence. Somewhere between 60% and 70% of of all humans today on the planet, adult humans, are lactose intolerant. It is actually a smaller percentage of us that are lactose tolerant. And everybody who is lactose tolerant as an adult has some of these genetic mutations, and they come from either a couple places in Europe or a couple places in Africa, depending. And that's it. So, couple things to think about when we are converting over to dairy from another animal. One is there is a huge difference between human breast milk and anything you can buy at the grocery store, like night and day difference. So, number one, I would never, ever give anybody on the planet, but definitely an infant, any sort of plant-based milk, especially an almond milk. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because studies are coming out now, only several years old, that are showing kids under the age of 10 presenting with kidney stones. They're growing up in houses where they're drinking massive amounts of almond milk. There's all sorts of issues with some of these plant-based milks. A lot of it has to do with the processing and the sugar content and all sorts of nasty things that are in it. But all of them have some level of toxin in them as well. And one of the issues with almond milk is it's loaded with oxalates, and these kids' bodies can't handle it. And we have 9-year-old kids with kidney stones, and it's something that is easily preventable. So that isn't the case. If I had a infant that I wanted to give a milk-like substance to, and they couldn't handle dairy for some reason, it would be coconut milk. That would be the one plant-based one I would feel comfortable with, and it's the only one we serve here at the restaurant. But as far as milk is concerned, it would always be whole milk. It would always be whole milk. And when we think about, don't get scared about whole milk. Whole milk is somewhere between 3.2 and 3.6% fat. Like, it's not like it's 50% fat. It is somewhere between 3.2 and 3.6% fat. So it would always be whole milk. Any part of the dairy industry that is pulling milk or cream off of that milk is doing it for the sole purpose of making more money. They get more money out of butter. They get more money out of ice cream. They get more money out of cream than they do from the milk. So they're pulling the fat, the most nutritious part of this, off, and making us think we're feeding, giving our kids skim milk is somehow making them healthier. It's only making the dairy industry richer. So it would always be whole milk. It would never be homogenized milk. I mean, I have a very strong stance on raw milk. High quality fermented raw milk is the most nutritious dairy outside of human breast milk in my mind, period. But I do realize that raw milk is inaccessible to so many different people, and that's a completely different topic, and I'd love to dive into it. But the one thing that is accessible all over this country, no matter where you live, is non-homogenized milk. The homogenization process is simply, nobody could make a health claim ever that homogenization is more healthier than non-homogenization. And the way they homogenate the milk is they take the cream, the fat, and they force it under high pressure through a steel plate with microscopic holes on it that literally explodes the fat molecule and makes them smaller. And they make them smaller, then they stay in suspension, and you don't get that cream line on the top. So you don't have to shake the milk before you drink it in the morning. But it puts that fat in a completely unnatural state that our bodies cannot recognize, cannot deal with properly. So at the very minimum, if you got, again, high quality, amazing raw milk from A2 raw milk from somebody you trust is the gold standard. But if you can't get that, at least get whole milk that has not been homogenized. That is amazing. If you can get A2, that's fantastic. If you can get on the lower ends of pasteurization, is a lot better than ultra high temperature pasteurized milk for sure.
And what do you think, just real quick, the difference between goat milk and cow milk? Because a lot of people say, well, I'm going to give goat milk to my kid because they say it's a lot more like human breast milk. But is that correct?
No, that's absolutely true. If goat milk is a lot easier for the human body to digest properly, and so goat milk is great. Cow milk from high quality cows is great for many of us. One other very quick thing I'll mention: the fermentation process, making yogurt, making kefir, making traditional cheese, is actually replicating a lot of the processes that happened in our own bodies when we were infants drinking from our mothers. So just because somebody can't handle ultra pasteurized skim milk doesn't mean they can't handle raw milk from a high quality animal, and very well may not mean that they can't handle for a high quality fermented dairy food. So to me, the gold standard would be raw milk from an animal you trust that has been through the fermentation process and turned into real yogurt, real kefir, real traditional cheese. And not to dive into the science behind all of it, but very quickly, I will say one thing. The fermentation process relies on lactobacillus bacteria that were naturally present in the milk when it was, came out of the animal, has been killed off through the pasteurization process and then reintroduced artificially. But that bacteria feed on the lactose and produce lactic acid and a ton of other things. So the process of fermenting reduces and sometimes eliminates the lactose in the milk because it's the food for the bacteria. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering why you're lactose intolerant, but you can do good on real yogurts or real traditional cheeses. It's because the lactose isn't there because it's was eaten up by the bacteria through the fermentation process. And our yogurt here that we ferment our yogurt for 24 hours and it eliminates the lactose. So our yogurt is a lactose-free food through natural processes.
I love that's a great way to end because most people always have the question about milk, and now we know what we should do with dairy, at least. That is a great way to end. And then as we grow older, it's just they need to eat this to the proportion they need to eat to continue to develop naturally as a human being should naturally develop. The foods nothing changes. The food we're giving our infants should be giving to our toddlers, to our kids, to our adolescents, and hopefully they take this to their families and continue to feed their families the way that we teach them so this can just go on and on and on, and we can continue to build health instead of sickness like we're seeing over the last 100 years because we've been, like you say, introduced to seed oils and all this stuff that's causing us to go downhill instead of actually go uphill and causing more and more health. So it's just a great way to start off. Remember how we do it, how they did it. They chewed, and then they gave, and then they were able to just eat it themselves. And then we just continue to progress. Just a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. I've taken so much out of it, just myself. So I know the listeners are going to get tons of information out of this, Bill. Again, thanks so much. Any last words before we let you go?
Yeah, I just say one thing. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I really am thankful to have the opportunity to share some of our message and mission here on your platform and on your podcast. I will say one thing: if you, when in doubt, when you're setting the table, you're preparing whether it's breakfast or lunch or dinner. There's one thing that I keep in mind that drives me all the time, and it's very, very simple, and it makes complete sense when you think about it. But when I look, literally, when I'm fixing dinner in the kitchen and I'm looking over at that table and imagining my family sitting around it, sharing a meal, what I'm thinking about is this: the goal every time that you sit down to a meal should be that when you get up from it, you feel better. Like you feel better than when you sat down. If you're hungry when you sit down, you should feel satiated when you stand up. If you come to that meal and something's been bothering you, right? You're anxious about something. The dinner conversation that you share with your family should make you feel, put you in a better state by the time you get up and leave. That table, your dinner table, your breakfast table, your lunch table should be this incredibly important, magical place that everybody knows when they come to it, they feel a certain way and they're going to feel better when they get up from it. And if that's the goal, and if you hit that goal more days than not, then you've accomplished everything that you should be looking for.
That's beautiful. I couldn't agree more with that. Oh my goodness, the table is such an important place in the family. And if we can make it not just the food we eat, but the emotional health and everything else that has to do with health at that table as a family, I think we could all progress very well, very rapidly. Again,
Absolutely.
beautiful. Thank you so much for those last words. I'll definitely take them to my table and try my best to be as will try my best to bring those words to our table and my family. Again, thanks so much, Bill. And we will again have to continue to chat because these conversations are always just full of gems.
Absolutely. So good to see you. Thank you.